Well, good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us tonight. My name is Ian Watson, Senior Planner with Upland Planning and Design. I also have my colleague Brandon online here, who's helping run the technical side of things. And we also have Scott Carnell on the call, who is the planner for the town of Stratford. There's Scott there. So you're here tonight to hear about the official plan and zoning and development bylaw review, and I'll get right into it. Oops, maybe I will. There we go. So as I mentioned, I'm Ian. I work for a company called Upland, and we work with municipalities around Atlantic Canada uh, on various projects, but especially planning projects, municipal plans and development bylaws is my specialty. As I mentioned, I'm joined here tonight by Brandon, but you all may also see through the course of this project, Ryan, our engagement manager, Lydia Broderick, our engagement coordinator. You might not see Rachel, but she's in the background making all our beautiful maps throughout the course of this project. So tonight, I'm gonna introduce the project, then take a little bit of a step back and do some planning 101. Why do we plan? What is the purpose of this? What's the end goal? And then talk a little bit about project timeline and engagement opportunities throughout the course of the project. And then, as I mentioned, we'll stop the recording and have an option or an opportunity for questions and answers and early discussion. So fundamentally, this project is to develop a updated official plan and zoning and development bylaw for the town of Stratford. So these documents, most municipalities in Atlantic Canada have them or are in the process of developing them. They guide development primarily and land use in our communities. And the official plan is I think of it as the blueprint. It's the overarching policy document. It's the vision, it's the goals, and high level policies for how the town is intended to develop over, in this case, a 15-year period. Then the zoning and development bylaw, that's the regulations. It's the zones, it's the rules about building height and land use and all of those things. It's what if you came into the town for a permit to build a house or to open a new business, this would be the document the town would look at to see if you meet the requirements and of the zoning and whether or not a permit can be issued. And the thing with planning documents is, a good plan isn't set in stone. Just like for example, business plan, you come back to them regularly and update them to change with the times, change with new assumptions, new data, new issues, and also to catch issues or things that may not have been caught in the first go around. If you look at the cover of the zoning and development bylaw there's what, maybe 15 amendments that have been done since it was adopted. And in PEI, typically planning documents are intended to be reviewed majorly every 10 years, but of course you do interim amendments and all of those things. So to take a step back here, what is planning? What is this actually all about? It's a collaborative process used to help citizens, business owners, and civic leaders envision a common future for the community. So fundamentally, it's about providing a framework to guide how land is used, how and where growth and development happens, and how and where buildings are built. A little more specifically, why do we do it? The quote I always like to use is, if you don't know where you're going, you might end up someplace else. Our communities are always changing. Change is inevitable, and you can either guide that change or you can just let it happen to you. And, it's going to happen, and it can be driven by developers or other outside forces, or it can be something that the community takes hold of and shapes. More specifically, we plan to support our community's character, culture, and identity. So who are we specifically as Stratford that makes us different than anywhere else? What are the things we value about our community that we want to preserve and enhance and promote? We also, this is a major topic, of course, in PEI, Atlantic Canada, Canada-wide, maybe worldwide, is housing. and making sure we have enough housing and enough types of housing, different types of housing to meet people's different stages of life and family sizes and desires and financial means. So part of planning is thinking about our housing needs and making sure that there's places in our community that enable different forms and densities of housing. Big part of planning is all about change, managing change, and predicting what changes are coming down the future and adapting to them. So that might be environmental change, things like climate change, which is going to have impacts on rising sea level levels, or climate in terms of temperature and agriculture and those things. But it can also be other types of change, like demographic change. For a long time in Atlantic Canada, we were talking about a shrinking population and planning for decline. We've also been talking about aging populations. People's housing needs, for example, change as they go through different stages of life. So how do we adapt our communities to address that? We plan to protect sensitive environments. There are a lot of places in Stratford and in PEI at large that aren't particularly sensitive to development. If you were to have development in them, they would be irreversibly damaged. And those can be things like wetlands, riparian areas along the coast, uh, habitats for species at risk, for example. And I guess maybe also the flip side of this is that there are environments that are hazardous to development. Wetlands, for example, can be quite hazardous, or coastal areas where there's flooding. So it's about thinking about how our human development fits into the natural environment. As our communities grow, there's an increasing demand for commercial services and economic activities. So thinking about where are the places in our communities for those things to go, and how do we allocate them and arrange them so that they are convenient to the people who need them, and attractive and contribute to our community. A big part of planning that you might not always think about is the infrastructure side of things. Uh, Municipalities and towns in particular, like Stratford, infrastructure is one of the biggest pieces of work they do, and it's certainly one of the biggest users of money and tax dollars. Things like roads, sewer, and water, those are ones we often don't think about until there's a problem. But also things like bike lanes, sidewalks, streetlights. And all of these things are, crucial to our quality of life, but they also cost a lot of money. So we want to make sure that we are thoughtful about where we put new infrastructure, and that where we have infrastructure, we use it to the best of its ability. This is probably really I guess the origin of story of planning in North America. This is where planning got its start, was the need or the desire to separate incompatible land uses. So there was a day perhaps where communities had the factory town, there was worker housing right next to the factory, you could walk to work. That was probably acceptable at the time. But these days, not too many people want to have a factory in their backyard. You might appreciate the employment opportunities or the materials that come from that factory, but you don't necessarily want to have the smokestack right there. So part of planning is thinking about having a place for everything and everything in its place, but not necessarily having the factory in the backyard. At the same time, maybe we've gone too far down that road in the last couple of decades in planning, and a lot of communities in North America, it's illegal to build the traditional Main Street, where you have, for example, residential uses over commercial, or where you can walk down the block to get a jug of milk. So a lot of the discussion in planning lately, and thinking about why we plan, is to actually go the other way and promote land use compatibility and the mixing of uses, making communities that have everything you need. So that's a bit about the why. The next question is, how does it work? So I already touched on the documents that fundamentally guide planning, but and these come out of legislation, provincial legislation, and through that, there are certain things as municipalities we can regulate, and certain things we can't. And some of the things that these planning documents can do to address all of those why we plans are regulate things like lot standards, building placement, building size, the uses permitted on the land. That's a big one. Signage, services, parking requirements, et cetera, et cetera. And, the planning documents don't have to regulate all of these things. It's really what's needed by the particular community, what's important to the residents. But certainly we have the ability to regulate these things to shape the community in the way that we want. On the flip side, and this isn't obviously not an exhaustive list, but these are ones that come up pretty regularly when I'm out talking to people about planning. There's a bunch of things we can't regulate through municipal planning. Things like resource activities. So, mining, forestry, agriculture, the actual act of agriculture. We don't necessarily regulate those things. Maybe the things to do with them, like where it's appropriate to have a sawmill, but not the forestry activity. We don't regulate most land below the ordinary high water mark. Then you're getting into provincial, federal territory jurisdiction. We don't regulate people. We talk about different types of housing, different unit sizes, but not who lives in them. We don't regulate land ownership. So, these documents wouldn't ever say this is going to be a condo and this is going to be a rental apartment. We could talk about multi-unit buildings, but the ownership structure of that doesn't get regulated by the documents, nor who owns it. We don't directly impact taxation through our planning activities. This comes up a lot. Well, you're going to do this plan, and are my taxes going to go up? And it does change how you can use that land, and if you use it differently, that might impact your taxes, but not immediately. And then there's also the bigger question of, for example, when we're talking about infrastructure, we can have big downstream impacts on the financial sustainability of a municipality through the decisions we make about infrastructure and things like that. But in terms of the tax rate or what your tax bill is, we don't regulate that through planning. And then finally, provincially owned roads and highways. They're provincial. Most importantly, and this is what I really love about planning, what gets me to my desk in the morning is planning's a collaboration. It's not just something we do at our desk for somebody else. It's ultimately, at the end of the day, these are your plans as a community. So this planning process involves first and foremost residents, town council, who at the end of the day will own, quote unquote, own these documents and be responsible for seeing to their implementation. The town has a planning advisory committee, or sorry, planning board rather, who advises council on issues related to planning. There's town staff who are responsible for the day-to-day of implementing these documents, issuing permits, that kind of thing. Community groups who, might be interested in environmental issues or transportation issues or whatever, of course, are really important stakeholders in projects like this. Businesses who are going to use be impacted by these documents. Also our neighbors, neighboring municipalities that who get impacted by land use decisions in our municipality. And then finally, as kind of the holder of the legislation and the group that creates municipalities, the province, of course, is a important partner in all of this. So one thing I do want to touch on actually a little bit as context for this, and you may have participated in this process previously, and you're wondering how does this tie into this plan review, is that is Shape Stratford. So the beginning, I think in late 2021 or early 22, the Canadian Mortgage and Housing Corporation issued a rapid housing challenge, looking for innovative ways to address housing issues across the country. And Shape Stratford, or sorry, the town of Stratford was a participant in that program with the Shape Stratford initiative. And this project highlighted community conversations required for a common understanding of the rising variety of housing needs and barriers and solutions. So it was all about looking into what are the issues and how do we address them, kind of that fundamental foundational conversation about housing. And it was an opportunity for residents to share their thoughts on the direction of the town. And there's a lot of work that went in, really impressive work that the town put together in terms of educational resources about planning, about development, and really shaping those conversations about the future of housing in Stratford. Another big piece of this work was a growth management strategy you may have participated in. Another company looked at different development scenarios in the town. If we're going to have X number of new dwelling units that we need to accommodate, how does that look in under different scenarios of kind of low density, medium density, high density? What does that actually mean in terms of land, how much land we eat up, and the services we need? So that was a really foundational piece of work too. And there's some really, this is a slide from the Shape Stratford presentation. There was a lot of fundamental work done on kind of the data side of things of what are we projecting for development in the future. And it's expected that there could be as many as almost 21,000 new residents. Almost tripling the population, I suppose. We're 1.5. So yeah, it's about 11,000, 12,000 now. So a significant growth in the population of Stratford by the year 2041. And what that turns into in terms of dwelling counts is a need for approximately 8,300 new dwellings by that time. And if Stratford keeps developing at the rate it's developing of new units, the community would be short just over 3,700 dwellings, which has impacts on costs and ability of people to grow in their community and live in the community. So a challenge that needs to be faced. So that Shape Stratford project and the associated growth management strategy were really foundational conversations about housing and development in Stratford, laying the groundwork for future planning. And out of that piece of work, one of the key tools that got identified as that piece of work is the need to update the town's official plan and zoning and development bylaw, and particularly as part of that process, revise zoning regulations in a way that encourages innovative types of housing and takes into account the need to accommodate all those extra dwellings. So Shape Stratford was the foundation, and this planning review is the implementation or the carrying on of that conversation into action through updated policies and regulations. So the project timeline, we're here, I guess now it's October. We're in phase 1, initial visioning. So this phase is we're looking high level. What are the key issues that matter to you as a community? What's the vision for the future? What do we need to make sure we're addressing through this plan review project? And this will be ongoing until the middle of November. We'll come back, report the initial results to council, and then early in the new year, start to get into the nitty gritty. So we will have a series of workshops looking at specific issues and options. How do we want to, for example, address housing? What are some of the key changes we need to make? Or talking about downtown development and commercial development, for example. So there will be a series of workshops that you're certainly, I encourage you to attend to get into the nuts and bolts of how we want to shape development in the future. We'll take all that, what we hear as part of that phase 2 issues and options. We will put together draft documents that we think carry out that feedback that we've received. And then kind of in the late summer, early fall next year, we'll be back with drafts. And that's your opportunity to look, how does this affect me directly? What's the proposed zoning on my property and all those kinds of things. But more importantly, do these documents reflect what you and the rest of the community said? What works, what needs to be changed? Those capital D drafts will be in draft form, and we'll want to know what needs to be fixed. We'll go back and update those documents, produce a second draft, and then kind of nearing the end of next year, there'll be kind of a last little check in to make sure that the second drafts really captured that feedback, make any final tweaks, and then there's a formal adoption process, kind of nearing the end of next year. And all that being said, as planning documents, as I mentioned very early in the presentation, they are living documents. And even once there's a formal adoption, it's very likely that there will be amendments, and there's opportunities to see what's working and what's not, and come back and make changes as necessary over the later years. So as I mentioned, this first initial phase of engagement, it's higher level, it's the big picture, what matters to you. And there's a number of activities that are happening as part of this first round of engagement. So there was an in-person version of this meeting on September 23rd. We're here tonight at the online public meeting. There is currently a public survey that I encourage you to take. It's on the project web page, which I'll show the link to in a second. But also, maybe Brandon, do you have that to drop in the chat, the link to the survey? So that's in the chat here on Zoom if you're interested. There's a business survey that should be live early next week that will get circulated to businesses. We'll be doing stakeholder interviews. And then there's the kind of get involved web page, which is the central hub for all of this. And I'll show the link to that in a second. And along each stage of the engagement, this phase one, but also later engagements, at the end of each phase, we will do a what we heard report, which will summarize the feedback we received and make it part of the record, and also act as a checks and balance, or an opportunity for you to check our work and make sure we're hearing what's important to you, and that will be made public at the end of each phase. So there's the website there for the project. There's also here an email, consultation@townofstratford.ca. So if you wake up in the middle of the night tonight and still have questions or comments that you want to send in, or at a later date, send it to that email and that will get to us. But other than that, that's the 101 summary of what's going to happen over the next year and a bit.